I wanted to ask the question, what are professional practices? The reason I said professional practices is that I wanted to make it plural. The most common question I get is, what is professional practice? And where in the curriculum do students learn professional practice? And I deliberately framed this as multiple because there's a myriad of what could be construed as professional practice. And some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight are things that maybe are less conspicuous and obvious. And where in the curriculum do students learn that? Well, my answer for the first question is a very SAIC answer. It's like, where's professional practice, or what is professional practice? And the answer is that depends. And then where in the curriculum is it? And it's everywhere. But there's some key places where it is fundamentally addressed. And I want to talk about the ways in which you might recognize when your student is engaged in professional practice activities that may not necessarily look like that from the outset. So here's our departments. This doesn't include liberal arts, which of course has natural science, social science, humanities. This is studio and writing and art history and criticism. And to give you an example, in our Department of Film, Video, New Media and Animation, a filmmaker will talk about the professional practice competencies that they need in a very different way from somebody who's teaching animation and what's applicable to that. So really sort of framing just that one department, there can be a divergence of kind of ideas and possibilities as to what professional practice constitutes, what it's framed as, and what a student will be engaged in if they're thinking about professional preparedness for a career or a range of careers. So that's a big list of departments. You'll notice we have a lot of departments that have multiple names in them. So the idea of sort of what might be happening in a department ranges and changes based on the materials and also what can be done with those tools after school. So given all those departments, I want to talk a little bit, my springboard for talking about professional practice is the academic spine. The junior professional practice seminar that you will see is taken in the third year. I think that's the only instance where you will find in the curriculum the word professional practice in the title. And I know as a parent, you might go and look at the course offerings and ask where that professional practice is, but I want to really stress that it's infused everywhere, but it's named very specifically in this particular course. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that staged. So let's talk about it from first year up, because this is a very deliberately scaffolded, evolving curriculum that's cumulative learning over a period of time. So it starts off, actually, I'll go back to this slide. It starts off in the first year. So the first year Research Studio 1, those of you who have first semester students, they're in that course just now. And that's very much an orientation to the school, to the resources. It's an introduction to critique. It's a kind of companion course to the core studio class that they're doing. We think about first year Research Studio as being almost like an introverted class. Students are really asked to reflect, think about their work, develop language, communication skills. They're thinking about critique, and that's evolving, etc. Sophomore seminar is what they will do in their second semester of their sophomore year. But before we get into the kind of stepping up through these various courses, I just want to point out that technically we have 5 academic spines. We talk about the academic spine, but these are the 5 undergraduate degree pathways, the largest of which is the BFA in Studio, but we also have the Bachelor of Fine Arts with an emphasis in writing, the BFAW. We have the Bachelor of Fine Arts with an emphasis in art education. We have the Bachelor of Arts in Art History, and we have the Bachelor of Arts in Visual and Critical Studies. Each of these degree pathways, while they're interdisciplinary and they can cut across one another, they have their own independent spine because each one needs slightly different things, speaking to that range of what professional practices are required. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that, so that when I'm talking about the academic spine, there's more than one version of it. So in orange, you can see that's the Research Studio in the first year. That's what all the students are taking. It's a required class. Sophomore seminar is interdisciplinary. So if I go back to that slide of all those previous departments, they could be taking a sophomore seminar course in any of those department offerings. It doesn't matter because everybody, no matter what the disciplinary position that they bring to sophomore seminar, it's open, it's interdisciplinary. So they might lean towards a particular department, but theoretically, the BFAW, the writing sophomore seminar, somebody in the BFA studio track could be taking that and vice versa, because we've agreed upon sort of benchmarked and lateral sort of understanding of what the learning goals are, that they're equivalent to one another. When we get into the junior professional practice and the senior capstone, I've identified them in red because they are then probably going to be taken in the area if a student is doing art education or they're doing BFAW or art history or the BFA in studio, they're probably going to be taking the junior professional practice and the capstone in the kind of degree area that they're then situated in terms of their final undergraduate degree. For the BFA in studio students, that means all of the studio departments are open to them. The sophomore seminar has an emphasis on mentorship, very deliberately so. We find it's really important that students have the capacity to work with a faculty member directly on their ideas, so that they bring their own ideas. It's a course where they're also developing, think about it as project management. They're developing their work, they're developing their skills for let's say sort of time management and how they unpack a project over the semester. But it's also a course that's focused on helping the students understand the vast range of courses that are available to them. When we have over 1,000 undergraduate courses offered in a given semester, there's a huge range of opportunity for the students, but it can be overwhelming as well. I should also mention that in the first year research studio, we have integrated advising, and that's when students are beginning to start planning for what they want to take in the second semester of the first year. However, sophomore seminar is really focused on sort of forward planning, what's long-term and short-term goals of a student. So it's the very beginning stages of the type of planning that you might be doing longer term in your career, thinking about 3, 5, 10-year goals. It's the very beginning process of thinking about that skill, just looking at our curriculum and how you navigate that. The junior professional practice is more externally facing, so it's really about opportunities outside the school. Sophomore seminar is very much about what's in the school. The visitors in those classes might be alumni, which is an important part of helping students understand what's possible from the curriculum, whereas then the junior professional practice begins to focus outside the school, looking for outside opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the senior capstone is really about that moment of what the sort of senior project is, what the culminating sort of work is from your 4 years. For a great many of our students, that's the BFA undergraduate show that is actually in the process of going up in our galleries just now. But in other areas, it means different things. If you're in film, it might mean that there's a kind of culminating screening opportunity at the Jean Siskel. It might be that you're involved in a performance festival. If you're in art history or VCS or in writing, it's opportunities to have a symposia and present your writing or your research and essentially share your work with an audience. So just before I move on, do you have any questions from the group about the academic spine, how it's structured, what the overall layout is? You can just unmute and ask a question if you want, since I can't see the screens. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll move on. What I want to just point out is the junior professional practice. You can do an internship as the junior professional practice class. So it's a $3.99 internship as professional practice. Rosalie talked last night about the internship opportunities. This is an opportunity where not only can you be doing it for credit, but it's actually fulfilling one of your required course requirements in the academic spine, which our students love to have that opportunity. I also want to mention that we found that a number of our students do the professional practice seminar like multiple times. That's something we discovered when we were doing curriculum review, that students actually want to take this class in multiple areas. It's a very popular class with our students. So, we allow them to take it in a different area, because even though the learning goals are broadly shared, the way that we arrive at those learning goals can be profoundly different. And so a student can be getting a very different experience if they do the internship as professional practice and then they do professional practice in, say, animation, they're going to get something different from that again. So I wanted to make that distinction and make you aware of that course opportunity. So there are some key things within the academic spine that we really put an emphasis on. I mentioned faculty mentorship. In the sophomore seminar, we also do peer mentorship. So we have students who are rising juniors who have just completed sophomore seminar. We select one from each class and we give them the opportunity to be a peer mentor and come back into the classroom and work with students. So they're 1 year ahead, but they come back in and they work, and they're really important for sort of like sometimes translating what it is the students are doing, and they've come to the end of that course, they've completed it and they understand its value. So we find it's very useful to have them back in the classroom and working with students. So we pay students to do that. And I kind of I put this broadly under this idea of building networks and relationships, because I think that students think about building their networks with professionals outside the school, but I like to remind students that they're building networks and working professional relationships with the people that they're next to, that they're their roommates, the people that they're in class with, the peer mentors that they work with. There's lots of layers and nuances to what constitutes a network, because 10 years outside of school, after you've graduated, it may in fact be the people that you came through the program with who are your network, not just the ones that you were actively building networks outside of the program, but also those who you built networks within the program. We also put a lot of emphasis on documenting the students' practice, and that means different things for different types of practice. But that begins in that Research One studio class that I talk about, where we think about how you set up studio lights, how you think about documenting a flat work, how you sort of situate your work in terms of how you discuss it, how you contextualize it. So while documentation of practice can be the taking the photographs and getting getting that documentation, it's also the kind of the peripheral information that comes with it. How do you talk about it? How do you think about the work? How do you explain it to others? So the communication aspect is a complement to that, how you write about it, how you ask questions about your work. And then that kind of builds into the portfolio, which we know is really important when you go to opportunities at CapX, where you're working with prospective employers, or you're looking for a internship or a job opportunity in outside of school beyond graduation. And most of our students don't think about what they're doing in classes, but it all kind of falls broadly under project management. We have a lot of students who graduate with the capacity to, beyond graduation, really run big projects and big initiatives, because they've been doing this the entire time they've been an undergraduate. And we don't use the words project management, I think, often enough, but it's what students are doing when they're thinking about a timeline, they're scheduling back, they're organizing things. Even as a faculty member might work with a student to realign a deadline because of difficulties that they're having. It's the kind of unexpected that things happen when you're running a big project and you're trying to readjust and focus. So I don't know that students think about those things as part of their professional sort of competencies and their professional preparedness that they're developing through courses, but that's certainly how I frame it. So this networking and relationship building, it really does begin day one. And I sometimes tell, I've spent most of my career working with first year students, and I want to remind them that as they step into school, who their roommates are, who their classmates are, who their friends are, the people that they critique with in the studios, and as they're working through various dynamics, collaborative or otherwise, in the studios, that's their immediate network. That's the network that they are going to sort of mature with through the school and develop. And in 10 years' time, the person that you are working beside in your core Studio One class might in fact be the person that's going to potentially hire you for a position or curate you into a show or write about your work in a publication. So the very sort of milieu of the school in and of itself is an incubator for those possibilities. So you have peer networks, you have faculty networks. Students don't always think about their faculty immediately as part of their network, but they're professionally connected, and they will stay with them through their careers potentially. We have opportunities where alumni come back into the Spine classes as a very specific part of the curriculum. That's an opportunity to build an extended network with some of our alumni, and there's various ways to do that. And then there's a more extended sort of professional arena. So I think about network and relationship building as this kind of set of concentric circles that kind of emanates out into the world and grows larger. As your networking and relationship framework grows, I also say to students that the art world gets smaller every 10 years. So every 10 years that you're in the art world, it feels like you know more people in it, and it becomes a more smaller and smaller world that more people are connected with. So we have a lot of students who are very interested when they first arrive at school in what their technical skills are. And I think it's important to remind them of the soft skills that they're developing concurrent to the technical skills that they're building. And one of the most important places for soft skills is in the space of critique. We talk about that's where we do sort of the evaluation of student work. That's where they're getting feedback on their process. But I do want to unpack critique as another kind of incubator for the development of their professional preparedness as a kind of another space for that. Sorry, I've got a wheezing dog in the background. That's the funny noise. So there's different types of critique. You know, we have one-on-one critiques. That's when you're having a conversation with potentially a faculty member or a visiting artist. Maybe you have an opportunity to work with an alumni or a guest in the classroom one-on-one. Sometimes a faculty member might set up a dynamic where two students are kind of working off one another in the critique format. And then there's group critique. That's the more conventional thinking about the whole class talking about a body of work or a project or a outcome. I think what's important to remind people about critiques is that really it's essential to building that sort of conceptually solid practice, you know, that you want to think about it as coaching up. Students are developing their work formatively. It's about ongoing improvement. I think it helps for students to understand what they want to ask in a critique. That's a skill that students have to develop and evolve over time, how to ask questions. It's important that they're continually involved in dialogue, and this is true for Life After Art School as well. Dialogue is imperative to stay contemporary, to stay relevant with your work, and it's a way to stay active in your art or your design community. And most importantly, it should be seen as a collaborative process, that you are learning as much from other people's work as you are talking about your own, as you sort of navigate these larger conversations. And it's really important for cooperative learning. Through school, I think artists are more generous towards one another, because outside of school, there's much more sort of emphasis put on how we're connected in networks, sorting and facilitating one another. So some other sort of important sort of professional preparedness aspects of critiques. It helps develop the students' critical thinking. They're obviously doing that when they're making work as well, but there's a kind of different level of detachment and kind of thinking through problems and ideas that happens in the immediacy of a critique. I think there can be a spontaneity and sort of a muscle memory that you develop through critique, so that when you're then working sort of more intuitively and responding to things, you're building that skill. I think it helps build resilience. There's times when critiques don't go the way that you expect them to, and therefore sort of dealing with disappointment or dealing with a kind of a track of your work being kind of taken in a different direction, and sometimes your work being misunderstood, is an important sort of capacity to deal with. Again, it's developing communication. You're not only giving feedback, but you're receiving it. So you're also developing your listening skills. To prepare for the critique, you have to deal with your time management skills. And most importantly, out of everything, I think critique really does build community in the classroom and develops a strong, cohesive sort of dynamic among students. The one thing we don't talk enough about in relation to critique is I think it's one of the spaces where a student really has the capacity to build their emotional intelligence. Again, because of some of the sort of the situations they might find themselves in critique. It's interesting, some students will tell an instructor that they want a harder critique. And I usually say, what does that mean? Or they want an easier critique. And when you start unpacking it, you realize there's this real sort of complicated mix of things that students are looking for critique. It's very important to talk to students ahead of time about what the parameters are. There's kind of expectations of sort of tone or behavior. Sometimes a class will actually set out what they decide as shared principles before the critique begins, because it's also a space where you can feel very vulnerable and you want to kind of use it as an opportunity to really develop the work and not shy away from some of the harder conversations that are actually very good and productive to have. So I think it allows students to certainly develop their self-awareness, their self-regulation. They can be very motivated by a critique, like it's driving towards that deadline. being very aware of kind of peer input on the work. I think it develops broad social skills in the studio, and I think it also develops students' ability to be empathetic to their peers and help and support one another as they sort of all present their various projects. So critique happens from first year all the way through to the senior year. And then when you get to that senior capstone class, you're really thinking about that as a culminating project. Again, in terms of professional preparedness, it means different things to different ways of working. The most conventional way that students are exhibiting their final project is in the final exhibition. They might be in a curated capstone section, or they might be in the open call undergraduate exhibition. Hopefully they've had opportunities to show prior to that, but there is a kind of professionalism about the gallery, about the exhibition staff, that they go through the process with the students as they would any other professional artist. So students get a real sense of the do's and don'ts of a gallery, what the etiquette is for things you can and can't do, that we obviously have parameters about what you can and can't do to walls, etc. And it's really important for students to be aware of that. But there's other opportunities as well. We have performance opportunities. Our undergraduates very often take part in the performance festival that also includes graduate students. So I think that's a kind of level of ambition that they really rise to. We have screenings for time-based media in the Siskel. And then there's opportunities for students to think about publishing. I put the word user in because I think that there's those who work in the design field who are thinking about end user experience and what that means to get a product or an idea that's more design orientated. But broadly speaking, who's your audience, who's your user, what does it mean to kind of culminate with your project and your interests? And of course, that's the body of work that gives you leverage for whatever the next step is going to be, whatever that next threshold is.
Hey, Dawn, could I stop you here? We had a question in the chat. Should a freshman should they have experienced a critique by this point in the year?
Yes, I would have expected. What I will say is they might not recognize it was a critique depending on how it was run. Like that there are some faculty with first year students who kind of ease students into it. What's interesting about critique is you can study the sort of theories of critique. There's different approaches to critique. There's different ways of doing it. Sometimes the faculty will discuss with the class how they're going to do it and they will vote on it. For example, one method of critique is to actually have all the work up and then have the students quietly and in silence just go around and write feedback to one another and share it. But a student might not recognize that that's critique because it's not everybody standing at a wall looking at a single piece talking about it. So there's different sort of ways to do it. And I think that most students will find a path through things that they like and things that they don't like. You have to try lots of different ways to critique on for size, I think. Any other questions about critique before I move on? And we can circle back.
Just add one comment very quickly. I'm so impressed by the 2 slides that you identified, the skills that are developed through those critiques, both the soft skills like communications and time management and going through the emotional intelligence. When we speak with employers and they talk about career competencies, it's technical skills is one thing they're looking for, and everything else is these soft skills. So through this and through that critique, we're doing a wonderful job of preparing students for work after they graduate.
I think sometimes we have to name these things for students and make it apparent to them. So it kind of facilitates their understanding of their own learning. Because, you know, it's funny, I can do a project with students and I very often give feedback forms at the end of class and I say, what did you learn? And they'll say nothing. And, you know, we've just spent 2 hours on something. So if I ask the question differently, I get a very different answer. And it's part of that practice of knowing how to ask the question. But you have to sometimes point out to them, especially a first year student or a sophomore, what they're learning and remind them of it and make it evident. And then they own it and they begin to recognize it and see that.
Dawn, so, I wouldn't be doing my job if I did just also highlight that tomorrow night our interest session is a critique. So you could actually attend a critique and participate in one under, the idea is that we model how it goes. And so yes. For parents who are really feeling like I need to know more about how that goes so I can support my student. I'll put my email in the chat, and you could certainly email me and attend tomorrow night if you're interested.
Do you
That's
have
great.
to-
Thank you.
I'm sorry, do you have to register through the same channel?
No, Lydia, I'll just, since registration is closed, if you just email me, I'll just send you the link.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'd strongly encourage you to attend the critique if you have an opportunity to. It's something that when I was a student, I was very apprehensive about critique before I went to college. I was frankly petrified of the idea too, because people just sort of put the fear of something into me that the idea of standing in front of people, I felt that it was going to be much more sort of exposing than it really was. And when I realized that it's a type of kind of collaborative coaching and conversation, and it's fluid and ever shifting, and that there's processes and ways to do it. So you'll find that faculty will not only participate in critique, but they will teach critique, which is something different again. Let me just make sure I'm plugged in here. Okay. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention other ways in which some of the same skills can be developed or realized. So I've worked a little bit with F News magazine. I think that there's opportunities outside of the classroom, that we have a lot of opportunities through our curriculum, but we have fantastic opportunities that are co-curricular. F News magazine is produced by students who are paid for their work. They work with a couple of staff people who advise on the writing and editing and the design. And we habitually and on an ongoing basis bring home a number of awards for the work that we do. That it's an incredibly dynamic student newspaper. They focus on things not just on campus, but current affairs. The quality of the writing, I think, is incredible. And the students to have that work and have those awards on their resume before they leave school is fantastic. So F News magazine is just one example of an incredible co-curricular opportunity for developing professional practice skills. And not all the students necessarily see themselves in publishing, but they find their way to that. And there's other ways of working on campus that, again, can give students incredible opportunities and experience. And we find that then that sort of like sense of being part of the campus community is very beneficial to their overall learning. So we have students who work in IRFM and different areas. So I wanted to talk about just some of the resources. I have a good stack. This is just some of them. I just pulled a few things off my library today, but I wanted to, if your student has upcoming birthdays, I just wanted to give you some suggestions. Some of my favorite resources to support the kind of work that I've just been talking about. This is Terry Barrett. CRIT's, a student manual, is just a couple of years old. It's a fantastic book. I know that we have faculty who are using this book and also this critique handbook, which has been out for a few years now. But that's a book that is referenced in first year a lot by the faculty. At one point, it was a shared book across the first year curriculum. But those are two books that just focus on critiques that I wanted to highlight for you. There's some other great works. This is a book called Artwork. I find it really funny that the back of the book says, find out what they don't teach you in art school, except they teach you it in art school. So I don't know very many people who don't have that book on their shelf. It's a great resource. It goes into profound detail, for example, how you ship your work. There's even in a section, because it clearly knows art students, there's a section on how to build a packing box to ship a wet painting. So if you've ever taught painting, most oil painting students turn up with their paintings sort of wet for critique, and certainly will ship them to exhibitions that way. Not that I recommend that. This is a great book. It's Artist as Cultural Producer, Living and Sustaining a Creative Life. Sharon Loudon, who did the interviews and edited this book, she's actually an alum of the school, but this is sort of has a series of interviews with students internationally, or not students internationally, artists internationally, about how they've sustained their creative life. I was kind of enjoy the fact that there's a couple of people I know from Scotland in this book. So Sharon's reach has been international, but it's a great primer for just understanding that there are as many ways to be a creative practitioner as there are people who are engaged in it. In the same way that I say there's as many ways to come through our open curriculum as there are students who are going through it. And then this is the best one of all. This is Getting Your Stuff Together. This is a great business manual. It's a workbook that you can work through. It has a kind of reflective component. Again, this is a book that a number of our faculty use in the academic spine, but it's a great self-work book that you can, a course is probably not going to deliver everything from this book, but you can work through it at your own pace. It has examples of contracts, and I've avoided talking about the obvious things like writing a grant and developing your resume, because I think they're the things that people most commonly think of as professional practice or professional preparedness. But I think those are things that students can engage in. And again, they're skills. If you're building your communication skills, if you're building your ability to talk about your work, I think those things come first before you can start writing grants to support that project. It's about how you describe yourself, your project, your ambition sometimes is very important as well. And then finally, for me, the most important thing about professional practice is I just think about the idea of art karma. I treat other artists the way that I'd want to be treated myself. When I've taught professional practice course in the past, I call them my art karma courses, and I want to foster a sort of collegial, cooperative and supportive environment amongst my students, where they not just look for opportunities for themselves, but they actively look for opportunities for themselves and their peers, so that they build a large network who is essentially building opportunities for everybody that's around them, to bring everybody up and promote opportunities for their friends, for their colleagues. And it certainly served me well in my career, and I've encouraged all of my students to kind of adopt a similar sort of generous attitude, so that it's not a sharp elbows kind of instance. So that's my presentation.